Empress Vivian had spent her entire life in a golden cage. Not that anyone called it that, of course. The palace was beautiful, marble floors that reflected the stars like mirrors, walls lined with ancient art, rooms so vast that her footsteps echoed for what felt like forever. But it was still a cage. Every single day from the moment she opened her eyes, there were people. Guards stood outside her chambers. Advisors waited in the halls with their tablets and their urgent problems. Servants moved silently through corridors, anticipating her needs before she even knew what they were. She couldn't take a walk without someone following 3 steps behind. She couldn't eat a meal without someone tasting it first. She couldn't even cry alone because there was always someone watching, ready to help. The worst part? Nobody ever told her the truth. They told her what she wanted to hear. They told her what they thought an empress should know. The history books painted the Valerian Collective as perfect, a civilization that had conquered the stars through pure superiority and ancient wisdom. But Vivian had started to notice the cracks. The outer colonies were struggling. The military kept losing battles to enemies that shouldn't have been a threat. The technology that everyone said was superior was actually falling behind. And nobody wanted to talk about it. So one night, when the guards changed shifts and the advisors were in their meeting rooms, Vivian did something nobody expected. She left. She didn't take guards or servants. She didn't announce it or ask permission. She simply walked out of the palace, wearing clothes she'd stolen from a maintenance worker, and she disappeared into the transport tunnels beneath the city. She made her way to the docks. There were thousands of ships there, cargo vessels, repair shuttles, old military transports that had been mothballed years ago. She chose one at random and hid inside an empty storage container. Hours later, the ship lifted off. She had no real plan, no destination in mind. She just needed to be away from that golden cage. The ship eventually brought her to a place that hardly anyone visited anymore, an old space station from the early days of the Collective. It orbited the outer rim, far from the main planets. The station had been abandoned decades ago when faster routes were discovered. Now it just drifted through space, a ghost of what it used to be. When Vivian stepped inside through a maintenance hatch, the first thing she noticed was the silence. There were no footsteps, no voices, no servants waiting in the shadows. Just quiet. The second thing she noticed was the darkness. The power systems had failed long ago. Most of the station was pitch black. Vivian walked carefully through the corridors, her hand trailing along cold metal walls, trying to find anything that might give her a clue about where she was or what was down here. That's when she heard it, a soft metallic sound from somewhere below. Someone was down there. Someone was working. Vivian made her way down the stairs carefully, step by step, descending into the lower decks. The darkness got thicker. But then she saw a light, a small, focused beam coming from around a corner. As she got closer, she could see a figure hunched over an enormous engine, so big that it took up half the room. The light was coming from a handheld flashlight held between the man's teeth as he worked. He was completely absorbed in what he was doing. His hands moved with precise, deliberate motions. He was studying the engine like it was a puzzle he was determined to solve. Around him lay scattered tools, torn pieces of machinery, and what looked like notes written on scraps of paper. Everything about this scene told Vivian one thing. This human was trying to fix something that most people would have given up on immediately. His name, she would later learn, was Tyler. He was a salvage engineer, someone who traveled from abandoned stations to abandoned ships, picking through the wreckage for anything valuable. He'd arrived at this station a week ago, looking for spare parts to sell. But he'd gotten curious about the main engine. Nobody had ever bothered to fix it before because it was considered too damaged, too old, too impossible. Tyler apparently didn't believe in impossible. Vivian watched him for a long time. She'd never seen anyone work like this before. The engineers in the palace worked because they were ordered to. They used fancy equipment and protocols that had been written centuries ago. They gave up when things got difficult. But this human, this Tyler, he was different. He was trying to understand the engine, to puzzle it out piece by piece. He was being creative about it. He was refusing to accept that something was broken forever. In that moment, standing in the darkness of an abandoned station, watching a human work by flashlight on an impossible problem, something shifted inside Empress Vivian. She realized she had so much to learn. Tyler felt her presence before he saw her. There was something different about the air, a shift in the way sound moved through the space. He pulled the flashlight from between his teeth and looked up, ready to tell whoever it was to leave. Salvage work was dangerous and stations like this attracted all kinds of trouble. But when he saw her face in the beam of light, something made him pause. She wasn't scared. She wasn't angry. She just looked curious. Need something or just lost? He asked, keeping his tone casual. Most people didn't wander down to the lower decks of dead stations unless they had a reason. The woman stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the engine. What are you doing? She asked. Her voice was strange, formal, like she was speaking a language she'd learned from books rather than living it. But there was genuine interest there, not judgment. Trying to see if this old thing still has any life in it, Tyler said, turning back to his work. He didn't expect her to understand. Most people wouldn't care about an engine that hadn't run in 30 years. Probably won't get anywhere with it, but you never know until you try. Why? The woman asked. Just one word, but it hung in the air like she'd asked the most important question in the universe. Tyler set down his tools and actually looked at her. Why what? Why am I here? Why am I trying to fix it? Why haven't I given up? All of that, she said. Everything. So Tyler started talking. He explained that salvage work meant you had to be willing to dig through garbage and broken things because sometimes, just sometimes, you'd find something valuable. He told her about how most people looked at something damaged and saw a loss, but he saw a puzzle. He talked about how humans had survived this long because they didn't accept the first answer. They poked at problems until they found solutions. As he talked, the woman asked more questions. She wanted to know everything. How did he learn to fix things? What made him think he could repair something so old? What happened if he failed? Where did he get his tools? Why didn't he just give up and look for something easier? With each question, Tyler realized this wasn't just curiosity, this was someone who genuinely wanted to understand. So he didn't brush her off. He showed her things. He pointed to different parts of the engine and explained what they did. He took apart a smaller component and let her watch as he cleaned it, replaced the broken pieces and put it back together. He told her stories about other jobs he'd worked on, other impossible things he'd managed to fix through sheer stubbornness and creativity. Hours passed. The woman, she still hadn't told him her name, never got bored. She didn't check a watch or lose interest. She just kept watching, kept learning. And somewhere along the way Tyler realized he was enjoying this. He was actually enjoying teaching someone who wanted to learn. The thing about humans, Tyler said at one point, sitting down on a crate and rubbing his eyes, is that we're not the strongest or the fastest or the smartest. But we're stubborn. We don't accept limits as easily as other species do. We see something broken and we think, maybe I can fix it. We see something impossible and we think, maybe I can do it anyway. It's gotten us pretty far. The woman nodded slowly, like she was processing every word. Do you ever succeed? She asked. Sometimes, Tyler said honestly. Not always. But enough times to make it worth trying. She stayed. That first night she slept in one of the old crew quarters. The next morning she came back down to the engine room. Tyler showed her how to use the basic tools. He let her try to remove a corroded bolt. It took her an hour and she got frustrated, but she didn't quit. When it finally came loose, she actually smiled. Tyler had never seen someone so genuinely excited about removing a single bolt. For 3 days they worked together. Tyler taught her the names of different parts. He showed her how to diagnose problems by listening to the engine, by feeling the different components, by understanding what each piece was supposed to do. The woman was a quick learner. She had questions that made Tyler think about his work in new ways. She wasn't afraid to make mistakes, and when she did, she asked why she'd made them instead of getting defensive. On the third day, as they sat eating some of the preserved rations Tyler kept on the station, the woman said something that stuck with him. I've spent my whole life being told what to think, she said quietly. Nobody's ever shown me how to figure things out for myself. Tyler looked at her and saw something he hadn't noticed before. Beneath the formal speech and the careful movements, there was someone who'd been trapped. Someone who was tasting freedom for the first time. Well, he said, smiling, you're doing pretty good so far. For the first time in her life, Vivian wasn't an empress being served. She was a student learning from someone who didn't care about her title. Tyler treated her like an equal. He corrected her when she was wrong. He challenged her ideas. He trusted her with important work. And in those 3 days in that dark engine room, Vivian learned more about herself, about humans, and about what was actually possible, than she had in her entire life in the palace. On the 4th day everything changed. Vivian and Tyler were back in the engine room, working on rewiring one of the auxiliary systems, when a sound cut through the silence. It was faint at first, almost like a whisper. But then it got louder. A beeping noise. A rhythmic, persistent beeping that neither of them had heard in days. That's the communication array, Tyler said, straightening up. It's coming back online. They made their way through the corridors to the old communication station. The equipment was ancient, decades old, maybe older. But somehow, after all this time sitting dormant, the power surge from Tyler's engine repairs had triggered a chain reaction that brought the system partially back to life. The screens flickered. Static crackled through the speakers. And then, cutting through the noise, came a voice. It was one of Vivian's advisors. She recognized it immediately. Chancellor Derek. And he sounded terrified. Anyone receiving this? This is an emergency broadcast from the Central Command of the Valerian Collective. We are under attack. A unified fleet from the Eastern Territories has launched a coordinated assault on our core worlds. Multiple stations have fallen. The colonial outposts are being overrun. We need reinforcements. We need. The message cut to static, then started repeating. The same desperate plea over and over. The Eastern Territories. An empire that the Valerian Collective had considered nothing more than a minor annoyance for the last century. An empire that shouldn't have been capable of this kind of coordinated assault. Vivian felt the blood drain from her face. Tyler was already moving, trying to get more information from the damaged communication system, but the signal was too weak. He managed to pick up fragments of other broadcasts. Reports of battles, casualty counts, strategic failures. It painted a picture of chaos. How long? Vivian asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How long what? Tyler asked, not looking away from the screen. How long until they reach the capital? How long until they reach the palace? Tyler did the math quickly. With their current approach vector and speed? 3 weeks, maybe 4. But that's assuming your people don't mount any kind of effective defense. Vivian's hands were shaking. She thought about the palace, about the advisors in their war rooms, making decisions the same way they'd been made for centuries. About the generals who'd been trained in outdated tactics. About the rigid hierarchy that didn't allow for anything unexpected or unconventional. About a military structure that valued tradition over results. She suddenly understood what Tyler had been trying to teach her. It wasn't just about fixing engines. It was about thinking differently. About adapting. About not accepting that something couldn't be done just because it had never been done that way before. I need to tell you something, Vivian said quietly. Tyler finally turned to look at her, and something in her tone made him stop what he was doing. He waited. My name isn't what I told you, she continued. I'm not just a wanderer. I'm not just someone who was lost on this station. She took a breath. I'm Empress Vivian. I rule the Valerian Collective. Tyler's expression didn't change for a full 3 seconds. Then his eyes went wide. You're what? An empress, she repeated, saying it like she was confessing a crime. I left the palace because I couldn't stand being trapped. I didn't think about what it would mean if something actually happened while I was gone. Tyler ran his hand through his hair, processing. For a moment he just stared at her. Then he said, okay, that's a lot. But we can deal with that later. Right now what matters is this. Your empire is under attack, and you're telling me your advisors have been making bad decisions. Not just bad, Vivian said. Catastrophic ones. They don't adapt. They don't change. They follow protocols that were written 100 years ago, even when those protocols clearly aren't working anymore. Then that's the problem, Tyler said, and suddenly he was moving with purpose. That's exactly the problem you were talking about in your first question to me. You asked why I didn't give up on broken things. Your empire gave up a long time ago. It stopped trying to fix itself. It stopped changing. He started gathering his tools. Look, I don't know much about imperial politics or military strategy. But I know one thing for sure. The only way to win against something that's adapting and evolving is to adapt and evolve faster. If your people are stuck doing things the old way and the Eastern Territories are willing to try new approaches, then your empire is going to lose. Vivian felt something crystallize inside her. A clarity she'd never experienced before. Tyler was right. The Valerian Collective had become like that old engine, damaged, broken, but too proud to admit it needed repair. I need to go back, she said. Yeah, you do, Tyler agreed. And I'm coming with you. Why? Vivian asked. This isn't your fight. This isn't your empire. Tyler looked at her with an expression that was half exasperation, half determination. Because you learned something here. You learned how to think differently, how to see problems from a new angle, how to not give up on things that seem impossible. Your people need to learn the same thing. And they're not going to believe it coming from you alone. They need to see it work. They need to see a human doing things their way and watch it succeed. He finished packing his tools and looked at her. Besides, I've spent my whole life fixing broken things. Might as well fix an empire. Vivian had spent her entire life being told what to do by advisors and protocol and tradition. For the first time she made a decision that was entirely her own. She nodded at Tyler. Then let's go save my people, she said. The war room of the Valerian Collective was exactly what Tyler expected it to be, ancient, rigid, and stuck in the past. The walls were lined with screens showing tactical displays that looked like they hadn't been updated in decades. Maps of star systems hung in holographic displays, frozen in their standard formations. The generals stood around a central table, all wearing dress uniforms with medals they'd earned through seniority rather than actual combat success. They looked at Tyler like he'd just walked in wearing a clown suit. Vivian entered the room with Tyler at her side. The moment the generals saw her, they straightened. Some looked relieved. Others looked guilty. Chancellor Derek, the voice they'd heard on the emergency broadcast, stepped forward with an expression of desperate hope. "Your Majesty, thank the stars you're safe," he said. "We've been searching everywhere for you. The Eastern Territories launched their assault while you were missing, and we've had to make critical decisions without your guidance. But now that you're here, we can coordinate a proper response using our traditional defense protocols. We have a strategy that has served us well for—" "We need to throw out everything you've been doing," Tyler interrupted. The room went silent. Every general turned to stare at him. Chancellor Derek's face turned red. "Who is this?" Derek demanded. "And who authorized him to speak in the Imperial War Room?" "I did," Vivian said calmly. "This is Tyler. He's here because he has knowledge we desperately need." Tyler stepped forward toward the tactical display. "Here's the problem with your current strategy," he said, pointing at the screen. "You're arranging your forces in defensive formations based on traditional doctrine. Your command structure is completely centralized. Every decision has to flow up through layers of bureaucracy to reach a general, and then it flows back down. By the time an order reaches the soldiers on the ground, the situation has already changed. Your enemy is faster because they're willing to adapt." General Corvin, the oldest and most decorated military commander, shook his head. "Our ways have served the collective for over 300 years. We have proven tactics. We have honored traditions. You cannot simply discard them because some outsider suggests it." "Your ways are losing," Tyler said bluntly. "You've already lost 3 major stations and 2 colonial worlds. At the rate you're going, you'll lose the capital in less than 3 weeks. So yes, actually, you can and you should discard them." Vivian watched the generals' faces. Some looked angry. Some looked stubborn. But a few, the younger ones, the ones who'd seen actual combat, looked thoughtful. Tyler continued. "Here's what I'm proposing. First, decentralize your command structure. Give junior officers the authority to make tactical decisions in the field instead of waiting for orders from above. Your soldiers on the ground can see what's happening in real time. They're the ones who should be deciding how to respond." "That's chaos," General Corvin said. "That's anarchy. How can we maintain military discipline without a clear chain of command?" "You maintain it through training and trust," Tyler said. "You teach soldiers to think strategically, not just follow orders. You trust them to make good decisions because they've been trained to make good decisions. Humans do this all the time. It works." He moved to another part of the display. "Second, we need to use unconventional tactics. The Eastern Territories won't expect you to use their own weapons against them. They won't expect you to sabotage their supply lines with improvised explosives made from recycled materials. They won't expect small mobile strike teams instead of massive frontal assaults. They'll expect you to do what you've always done, which is why they're winning." Chancellor Derek looked like he wanted to argue, but Vivian stepped forward. "We're going to try this," she said. "It wasn't a request. Tyler and I will select volunteers, both humans and Valorians who are willing to think differently. We'll form a specialized unit and execute an operation using his tactics. If it fails, we'll return to traditional methods. But if it succeeds, we adopt this approach across the entire military." The generals didn't like it, but they couldn't argue with an Empress. Within hours, Tyler was working with a team of soldiers and engineers. Most of the Valorians he selected were young, people who hadn't been completely indoctrinated into the rigid old ways. He also recruited every human who'd arrived at the palace in the evacuation shuttles from the outer colonies. Humans who were desperate, creative, and willing to try anything. Tyler's plan was radical. While the main Valerian fleet was distracted by a decoy operation, his mixed team of humans and young Valerian soldiers would strike at the enemy's command ship. They wouldn't use a direct assault, that would play into the enemy's strength. Instead, they'd use infiltration, sabotage, and misdirection. They flew in small, fast shuttles instead of military transports. They dressed in salvaged enemy uniforms instead of Valerian colors. They used code sequences that Tyler had helped crack from intercepted communications. When they reached the enemy carrier, they didn't announce themselves. They snuck aboard like thieves. The human soldiers and the young Valerian volunteers worked together with a fluidity that the old generals would have thought impossible. A human named Rebecca led the infiltration team through maintenance corridors while a Valerian soldier named Kess provided tactical support. They didn't wait for orders from above. They communicated directly with each other, made decisions on the fly, adapted as situations changed. When they encountered enemy resistance, they didn't fight head-to-head. Instead, they used the station's own systems against it. A human engineer named David rigged the power grid to create cascading failures. A Valerian soldier named Thorn used knowledge of Valerian military psychology to predict where enemy reinforcements would move, and they set ambushes accordingly. The operation took 18 hours. In that time, Tyler's team crippled the enemy command ship's communications, destroyed their strategic displays, and killed the commanding admiral. They didn't lose a single person, though it was close a few times. When news of the successful operation reached the main fleet, everything changed. The Eastern Territories' coordinated assault fell apart without central command. Their forces became disorganized, predictable, easier to defeat. The tide turned. Within a week, the enemy was retreating. For the first time in the Valerian collective's history, success had come not from rigid tradition, but from innovation. Not from hierarchy but from teamwork. Not from Valorians alone, but from humans working alongside them as equals. And in the Imperial War Room, even General Corvin had to admit something he never thought he'd say: the outsiders had been right. 3 months after the victory, the palace had changed in ways that would have seemed impossible just weeks before. The throne room doors were open. Literally. They no longer closed at night. And more importantly, the people walking through them were different than they used to be. Vivian sat in the council chamber, a room that used to be reserved only for the highest-ranking Valerian nobles. But now the table was filled with a mix of faces. Tyler sat to her right, holding a tablet with tactical reports. Beside him was Rebecca, the human soldier who'd led the infiltration team, now serving as a military liaison. On the other side were Valerian officers and engineers, all working together like they'd been doing this for years instead of weeks. The outer colonies are requesting permission to establish direct trade with human settlements, said a Valerian administrator named Tess, reading from her notes. Previously, all trade had to be approved through the central authority, which took months. If we allow them to negotiate directly, we could accelerate economic growth significantly. Tyler nodded. That's exactly how human trade networks work. You let people at the local level make decisions based on what they actually need instead of waiting for bureaucrats who don't understand their situation. It speeds everything up. General Corvin, who still attended these meetings but had finally started listening instead of just arguing, stroked his chin thoughtfully. This goes against 3 centuries of trade protocol, he said. But then he added, however, the results from the northern colonies have been positive. I'm willing to support this. That was the thing that amazed Vivian the most. The old guard wasn't completely disappearing. They were learning. Slowly, reluctantly, but they were learning. I have news from the universities, said Dr. Helena, who now led the newly formed Department of Human Valorian Innovation. The engineering program has its first graduating class of mixed teams. 20 Valorians and 15 humans completing their degrees together. They're already proposing collaborative projects for the manufacturing sector. Tyler smiled. What kind of projects? Recycled materials engineering, Helena said. They want to design systems that can turn waste products into useful materials. One of the human graduates suggested it would reduce our dependence on mining operations by up to 40%. Rebecca leaned forward. That's huge. Mining operations are expensive and dangerous. If you can reduce your need for them, you free up resources for other things. Vivian listened to them talk, occasionally asking questions but mostly just watching. This was what she'd learned on that abandoned station. The value wasn't in making all the decisions yourself. The value was in creating space for smart people to work together and solve problems. Her role had changed from dictator to facilitator. And honestly, it was better. After the council meeting ended, Tyler walked with Vivian through the palace corridors. They'd done this several times in the past few weeks, just walking and talking, no official business, no agendas. How are you feeling about all this? Tyler asked. Honestly? Vivian said. Terrified, excited, grateful. All of it at once. That's a good combination, Tyler said. It means you're not becoming complacent. They reached the observation deck overlooking the capital city. From here, you could see the entire sprawling metropolis below, Buildings that had stood for millennia, streets that had been walked by billions of Valorians throughout history. But now, new structures were going up. New facilities for collaborative research. New training centers where humans and Valorians learned together. New factories where unconventional engineering approaches were being tested. "I've been thinking about going back," Tyler said quietly. Vivian's heart dropped. "Back where?" "To salvage work," he said. "There are other abandoned stations. Other places where broken things are waiting for someone who refuses to give up on them. I could help establish a network of salvage operations. We could recover resources, restore old technology, train human and Valorian teams to work together. It could expand what we're doing here to the whole empire." Vivian understood. Tyler wasn't built to sit in palaces and attend council meetings. He was built to work, to create, to fix things. That was his nature. And honestly, the empire needed people like him doing exactly that, spreading the philosophy of adaptation and innovation to every corner of the civilization. "Okay," she said. "But you're not going alone. I'm sending a team with you. And you're coming back to report to the council every quarter." Tyler grinned. "I can work with that." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun set over the capital. The sky turned colors that had no names, oranges and purples and deep blues. Stars began to appear one by one. The same stars that Tyler had been navigating by when he worked on abandoned stations. The same stars that Vivian had been trapped looking up at from her palace. "Do you regret leaving?" Tyler asked. Vivian thought about it. She thought about that first night on the abandoned station watching him work by flashlight. She thought about all the things she'd learned that she never could have learned in the palace. She thought about the fear in her advisors' faces when she'd suggested changing everything. She thought about the success of that first mission, when humans and Valorians worked together and won. "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it at all. Leaving the palace was the best decision I ever made. But the second best decision was staying on that station long enough to really listen. To really learn." Tyler nodded. "That's what humans do, you know. We break things down. We look at the pieces. We figure out how they work. We imagine how they could work better. We try new things, we fail, we adapt, we try again. It's not complicated, but it works." "It worked for an empire that had forgotten how to change," Vivian said. Over the following years, the transformation accelerated. Universities that had taught the same curriculum for 500 years began experimenting with new teaching methods brought by human educators. Military academies started training soldiers to think independently instead of just follow orders. Factories that had used the same production techniques for centuries began testing innovations that seemed radical but produced better results. And at the center of it all was a simple truth that Tyler had taught Vivian on that abandoned station. The only way to survive in a changing universe is to change yourself. The Valorian collective didn't disappear. It evolved. It became something new, something that honored its history but wasn't imprisoned by it. Something that valued wisdom but also welcomed innovation. Something that could adapt without losing its identity. Vivian stood in the throne room one evening, looking out at the stars visible through the grand windows. She thought about that abandoned station now being restored as a research facility. She thought about that massive engine, probably still running, probably producing power for scientists and engineers conducting experiments that would have been unthinkable just a year ago. She thought about Tyler, somewhere out there in the darkness of space, working on another broken thing, refusing to accept that anything was beyond repair. And she smiled. Because she finally understood what he'd been trying to teach her all along. An empire isn't great because it's old or powerful or rigid. An empire is great because it's willing to learn. And the best leader isn't the one who has all the answers, it's the one willing to be a student. That was the real treasure she'd found on that forgotten station. Not victory or strategy or power. Just the simple, profound knowledge that everything, broken engines, struggling empires, empresses trapped in palaces, everything could be fixed if you refused to give up on it. And that made all the difference.